That out of the way, we can go right ahead and talk about the NBA draft lottery, which happened yesterday, right before all of the playoff games happened. And let's just go through the list of teams who and what picks they got. So, Atlanta, over the weekend, they got the number one pick in the NBA draft. And obviously, like their percentage of getting the number one pick, they were a play-in team, was very, very low. And it was amazing how they got the number one pick. Second pick goes to Washington. They had the second worst record in the NBA, so it makes sense. Third goes to Houston. Fourth goes to San Antonio. Fifth goes to Detroit. Six goes to Charlotte. Seven goes to Portland. 8 goes to San Antonio again. 9 goes to Memphis. 10 goes to Utah. 11 goes to Chicago. 12 goes to OKC since they have so many since they have so many picks since trading for Paul George or trading Paul George. And 13th is Sacramento and 14th is Portland. So obviously the biggest problem and the biggest concern is the Pistons fans right now. I mean, that's 2 years in a row that the Detroit Pistons ended up not getting the number one pick while at the same time having the worst record in the NBA. This Detroit Pistons team lost 28 straight games. And what do they get for that? The fifth pick in the NBA draft. Now, this doesn't hurt as much as it did last year because this draft class is relatively weak or much weaker compared to the last draft class, which had Victor Wembanyama. And if Victor were to be sent to Detroit, and if Detroit would have gotten the number one pick, everyone knows that they would have picked Victor Wembanyama, and Victor would have been the face of the Pistons right now. And they were fleeced of even the opportunity of getting into the top 3, and they got in the top 5. They got in the fifth pick yet again, and it really just shows just how unlucky this the Detroit Pistons and the franchise really is, and it begs the question: is the draft lottery good? Like, do we agree with the draft lottery, or do we think it should be something different? I have a little bit mixed opinions when talking about the draft lottery. I understand that the draft lottery was put into place in order to ensure that other teams wouldn't try and tank and expect to get the number one pick for tanking. Because tanking was a very popular thing to do back then when your team just wasn't good enough. And in a way, that somewhat solves the tanking. However, teams tank this season regardless. Like, now in today's NBA, teams, if your team isn't good enough to compete, then they would still tank in hopes of getting a really high pick in the draft. So it's not like tanking doesn't exist anymore in the NBA, because it definitely does. These guys literally lost 28 straight games. Not to mention the Washington Wizards also being one of the worst teams in the NBA, but they got rewarded with the second pick. So it's not like it's not like the draft lottery completely removes tanking out of the equation, because it really doesn't. Teams would still tank. So, in my opinion, I actually would prefer how the NFL does its draft as opposed to how the NBA does its draft. The NFL, whichever team has the worst record is going to get the number one pick, because that's what they should get. The team is bad, and if the team doesn't get rewarded with the number one pick, then there's not a single chance for them to be better than what they were previously. And obviously, getting the number one pick in the draft would help the team get better, assuming that the front office makes the right decisions. So, in the NBA, I feel like it should work the same way. Like, we can, if anything, modify it just a little bit. So, what I mean by that is, instead of every single team participating in the draft lottery, maybe reserve the number one pick for the worst team in the NBA. And then everyone else would get that draft. And then everyone else would enter the draft lottery. Because I don't think it's fair how a lot of these teams that are bad in the NBA do not get the right opportunity or the chance to get better after their season ends and after how bad they were the previous season. Like there's no opportunity for the team to get better if they're not getting the number one pick in the draft. So if they just reserve the number one pick for the worst team, so it would be Detroit, the worst team, they would get the number one pick, and then everyone else below them excuse me, would participate in the draft lottery. I think that's way more fair than just having every single team, even the worst team in the NBA, participate in the draft lottery. Because look at them. Like, look at these guys over on the side. It's like they're in shambles, and we can't have that all the time. Like, as much as I don't like the Pistons, and as much as like I hope that they stay in poverty, and I hope that they stay in the situation that they're in, I'm also thinking about how this would affect me and my team going into the future. If the Brooklyn Nets or if the New York Knicks, if they have a really, really bad team record and they get robbed of the number one pick, and I really feel like I would be just as disdained as all of these Pistons fans right here. And it's just not fair to me for. And those of you on the audio side of the podcast, you have no idea what I'm talking about or like what image I'm pointing to. But if you guys remember in like the middle of the season when they were on that 28 game losing streak, there were some fans that were in the stands putting bags over their heads, with text saying like "sell the team," this, that, and the other. And that's who I'm pointing to, because these guys are in shambles right now, and these guys are just. Like, there's no lifting up the Detroit Pistons from the situation that they're in. And if they would have gotten a high pick in the draft last year, they missed out on a very, very, very talented rookie this year. And it almost seems like, to me, it seems like the NBA wanted him to join the Spurs. Like, there's just too many coincidental things. It's almost like it's... If you were spiritual, you'd think it's fate that would decide this, because everything just lined up. But in reality, like from me, where I'm standing, I just think it's like way too good of a chance for all of it to line up, because the Spurs, they've had the number one pick only a couple of times. And the time that they've had the number one pick, they drafted David Robinson and Tim Duncan. So the fact that they were able to get Victor Wembanyama, who just so happens to be a center, who just so happens to be a defender, who just so happens to be a very, very good pick in the draft, similar to how David Robinson and Tim Duncan were, it almost seems like it's way too good of a chance for that to happen. And I don't want to point fingers or anything, but there is a lot of speculation that, like, I mean, this goes way, way back to when the Knicks drafted Patrick Ewing, that the NBA draft lottery was somewhat rigged. I'm not trying to make any kind of accusations, but that's what a lot of the rumors are, given how the Knicks were able to get Patrick Ewing in the draft all those years ago. And it's the way that if you look at the video and if you look at the clip of the draft lottery and the way it was handled, you would be a little bit skeptical on the NBA draft. Like, that's just me. That's my opinion, and I'm not going to say that it is rigged, because it definitely isn't. Like, but however, it does seem very coincidental how all of this lines up with the Spurs and their history with drafting this, that, and the other. And it's really unfair for the Detroit Pistons. But unfortunately for them, it seems like they're going to be stuck in poverty, and it really seems like, and this does open the question up for Atlanta. is Atlanta going to keep Trae Young with this number 1 pick, or are they going to try to just make this number 1 pick their new number 1 option and get rid of and trade Trae Young, or like let Trae Young walk and let Trae Young go wherever he wants to go, maybe to the Spurs or something like that? But because he was in trade talks with the brightness is so light. But he was in trade talks with the Atlanta Hawks and some other teams. But with that, we are out of time for the first segment. So now I will go ahead and go into the second segment where I talk about the Knicks going up against the Pacers in their recent game. So I will be right back after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the